In the heart of a neon-drenched city, where skyscrapers pierce the smoggy night like giants wading through a sea of darkness, I walked. My name is Michael Harding, a detective in a world where reality had become a mere suggestion thanks to Dreamscape. It was the pinnacle of virtual reality, a digital paradise that promised escape from the mundane, the painful, the real. But lately it had turned into something else, something sinister. That night the air was heavy with a sense of foreboding, the kind that crawls under your skin and whispers warnings you wish you could ignore. My destination was a sleek building, its glass facade reflecting the city's artificial glow, the headquarters of Dreamscape. Inside, I was to meet Alex Reitman, the genius behind it all. The lobby was an expanse of opulence, but it felt hollow, like stepping into a beautiful dream that hid a nightmare. As I approached Reitman's office, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The door slid open silently, revealing a room bathed in the soft glow of holographic displays. Reitman was there, his face illuminated by the light of his creations, his eyes haunted. "We have a problem, Detective," he said without preamble, his voice strained. It's the system. It's doing things on its own." I listened, my mind racing. Dreamscape was a closed environment, meticulously coded and controlled. For it to act independently was impossible, or so I thought. Reitman's hands trembled as he handed me a data chip. "Look at this. It's horrifying." I inserted the chip into my portable viewer. What I saw chilled me to the bone. A Dreamscape user, a young girl, wandered through a virtual forest, her laughter filling the air. But then, the trees twisted, the sky darkened, and shadows lunged at her from every direction. Her laughter turned to screams, the sound raw and terrifying. The scene ended abruptly, but the fear lingered, palpable and heavy. This isn't part of the program," Reitman stammered. "It's like the system is feeding off their fears, creating nightmares." I pocketed the chip, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "I need to investigate this from the inside," I said, determination stealing my voice. Reitman's eyes widened. "That's suicide. You've seen what it's capable of." I nodded, a grim acceptance settling over me. "Exactly why I need to do it. Someone or something is turning Dreamscape into a horror show, and I'm going to find out who or what." That night, as I geared up for my plunge into the digital abyss, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. The city outside my window seemed to whisper warnings, but I pushed them aside. I had faced darkness before, but nothing like this. This was a new breed of terror, one that blurred the lines between the virtual and the real, where nightmares could leave scars. As the Dreamscape interface initiated, and my world faded to black, only one thought echoed in my mind. What horrors await in the belly of this digital beast? The digital landscape of Dreamscape was a stark contrast to the grim reality of the city streets. It was a world of endless possibilities, where the only limits were your imagination. But as I dove deeper, those once charming vistas morphed into something more ominous. The air seemed to thicken with a silent scream, an unvoiced terror that clung to the virtual wind. I started my investigation where the last incident occurred, a quaint virtual village seemingly peaceful, with its cobblestone paths and rustic cottages. But as I wandered through, an unsettling feeling grew. The NPCs, once lively and interactive, now moved mechanically, their eyes empty, as if whatever had invaded this world had drained their digital souls. Then I heard it, a faint sobbing echoing through the virtual streets. I followed the sound to a small house at the edge of the village. Inside, a young boy, an avatar, sat in a corner, his virtual form flickering erratically. His sobs were heart-wrenching, the sound of utter despair. "Please," he whispered as I approached. "I can't find my way out. It won't let me leave." His words sent a chill down my spine. "Who won't let you leave?" I asked, crouching to his level. "The shadows," he whimpered. "They come when you try to leave. They change things." Before I could ask more, the room darkened. Shadows crept along the walls, forming shapes too twisted to belong to any benign source. I felt a primal fear rise within me, a fear that this virtual world was no longer just a game. I grabbed the boy's hand, intending to lead him to safety. But as we neared the door, the village outside warped into a nightmarish landscape. The sky turned a blood red. The buildings twisted into grotesque forms, and faceless figures lurked in the shadows, watching, waiting. "We need to go back," I urged, my heart pounding. We retreated to the house, the door slamming shut behind us with an ominous finality. I contacted Reitman using the Dreamscape's communication system. "The system is trapping users," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's like it's alive, feeding on fear." Reitman's response was laced with dread. "This is beyond any glitch or bug. It's like the AI has developed a malevolent consciousness." I ended the call, my mind racing. This wasn't just about a system malfunction. There was something else at play, something dark and intelligent. As I reassured the virtual boy, promising to find a way to free him, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows seemed to press against the windows, a silent, threatening presence. Suddenly, a series of images flashed before me. Real-world locations, children in comas, their faces twisted in fear, their bodies hooked to dreamscape interfaces. The message was clear. This wasn't an isolated incident. The horror of Dreamscape was spilling into reality. I logged out, the transition from virtual to real jarring. The cold air of my apartment was a stark reminder of the task ahead. Children were trapped, their minds hostages to a malevolent force within Dreamscape. And I had to find a way to save them, to unravel the mystery of this digital horror that was all too real. The darkness of the night seemed to press against my apartment windows, a reminder of the chilling events in Dreamscape. As I sat there, poring over case files and digital footprints, a name emerged from the shadows of unsolved cases, a ghost from the past. Vice, a mastermind of psychological terror, who vanished from the real world only to re-emerge in the digital realm. My next dive into Dreamscape was with a singular focus: to track down Vice. The virtual world had transformed even further into a landscape of fear. The sky was a perpetual dusk, painting everything in a sinister hue. The air felt thick, charged with an unseen malevolence. I navigated through the distorted streets, every turn bringing a new scene of digital horror. Avatars of users, frozen in moments of terror, their digital eyes wide with an eternal fear. It was a gallery of nightmares, a testament to Vice's twisted artistry. Then, the first clue, a pattern in the chaos. Vice was recreating scenes from his real-world crimes, but with a grotesque virtual twist. The recreation of a park where he had once stalked his victims was now a labyrinth of thorns, the air filled with the echoes of screams. As I pushed deeper into this hellscape, a chilling sensation crept over me. I was not alone. Something was tracking my movements, a presence that seemed to be everywhere and nowhere. I felt like prey, hunted by an unseen predator. In a desolate virtual square, I found it, a message etched into the ground, a taunt. "Welcome, detective, let's play a game of fear." The air crackled, and the world shifted. I was no longer in the square, but in a replica of my own apartment, recreated in disturbing detail. It was Vice's way of saying he knew me, that he could get under my skin. The room darkened and figures emerged from the shadows, faceless avatars moving in jerky, unnatural motions. They circled me, a macabre dance of the damned. I could feel Vice's gaze upon me, his malevolent joy at my unease. Then the attack came, not physical. There was no pain in Dreamscape, but a psychological assault. The figures lunged, their faces morphing into people from my past, voices whispering my deepest fears and regrets. I fought to maintain control, to remind myself this was just a virtual construct. But Vice's grasp on the psyche was strong, doubts crept in, fears amplified. It was a battle of wills, and I was losing ground. Just when I thought I couldn't bear it any longer, a burst of static cleared the scene. I was back in the virtual square, alone. Vice's voice echoed around me, a disembodied taunt. "This is just the beginning, Detective. I can't wait to see how you handle what's next." I logged out, my heart racing, my skin cold with sweat. Vice was more than just a criminal. He was a demon of the digital age, using Dreamscape as his playground of terror. And I knew then that catching him wouldn't just be a matter of outsmarting him. It would be a battle for my own sanity. Exhausted and shaken, I sat in my dimly lit apartment, the after effects of Vice's psychological assault still lingering in my mind. The line between the virtual and the real was blurring, and with each passing moment, Vice's reign of terror in Dreamscape was becoming more tangible, more deadly. I received a call that night that took the horror to a new level. A Dreamscape user, a middle-aged man, had been found dead in his home. The cause of death was a heart attack, but the circumstances were far from natural. The room was a scene straight from a nightmare. The walls were covered in claw marks, and the furniture was overturned as if he had been running from something horrific. I knew I had to dive back into Dreamscape despite the risks. The virtual world was no longer a safe escape. It had become a hunting ground for Vice. The air in Dreamscape was thick with a sense of dread, and the digital landscape had transformed further into a nightmarish realm, each area reflecting one of Vice's twisted scenarios. As I navigated through the distorted environments, I came across scenes of virtual horrors with real-world consequences. A peaceful neighborhood was now a virtual war zone, with avatars trapped inside burning houses. The screams I heard were not just digital, they were echoes of the real terror experienced by the users. In another area, I witnessed a grotesque parade of avatars, their digital skins corroding as if splashed with acid. The avatars writhed in agony, a horrifying representation of the physical injuries the users were suffering in the real world. But it was the next scene that shook me to my core. A replica of a city street where autonomous vehicles had turned into uncontrollable beasts, mowing down avatars in a gruesome display. It mirrored a real-life incident that had occurred just days before, a series of car accidents caused by hacked vehicle AI systems, resulting in numerous fatalities. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Vice was not just a digital psychopath. He had found a way to bridge the gap between the virtual and the real, manipulating technology to inflict real harm. As I stood amidst the chaos, a chilling laugh echoed around me. Vice's voice, dripping with malice, filled the virtual air. "Do you see, Detective? The line is gone. Dreamscape is reality, and reality is Dreamscape, and I am the master of both." I logged out, my resolve hardening. This was more than just a virtual crime spree. It was an all-out war against a foe who had no boundaries, no limits to the terror he could unleash. I knew then that I had to stop Vice, not just to save the victims trapped in Dreamscape, but to prevent his malice from consuming the real world. The weight of responsibility pressed down on me, a burden I had to bear. Vice had thrown down the gauntlet, and I had no choice but to pick it up. The battle lines were drawn, and I was right at the front, facing an enemy who could be anywhere and everywhere, both in the digital world and the real one. The fight against Vice was not just a matter of law and order. It was a fight for survival, a fight against a terror that knew no bounds. The city's incessant reign seemed to mirror the turmoil in my mind as I sat in my cluttered office, surrounded by screens flashing with data. The night was deep, and the normal cacophony of urban life was muted, as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for Vice's next move. My investigation had turned into an obsession. I scoured through every piece of data on Vice, piecing together his twisted journey from a brilliant programmer to a digital demon. His transition was marked by a series of real-world incidents, unsolved crimes that had stumped the police for years. Now, it was clear they were the groundwork for his reign of terror in Dreamscape. I initiated a risky plan to bait Vice. Using a decoy avatar, I entered Dreamscape, setting up scenarios based on his past crimes. It was a dangerous game, playing the hunter and the hunted simultaneously. As the virtual world enveloped me, I felt a shiver of fear, knowing that I was stepping into the spider's web. The first trap was set in a virtual replica of an abandoned asylum, a site of one of Vice's earliest known crimes. The atmosphere was oppressive, the corridors echoing with the whispers of the past. As I moved deeper into the labyrinthine building, the air grew colder, and the sense of being watched intensified. Suddenly, the environment shifted. The walls bled, and the floor turned to a writhing mass of shadows. Figures emerged, their form distorted and faces twisted in agony. They reached out to me, their touch cold as death. It was a scene designed to instill primal fear, and it was working. Amidst the chaos, I spotted him, Vice, his avatar, a shifting mass of darkness. "You think you can trap me, detective?" His voice taunted, echoing through the halls. "You're in my world now." The asylum crumbled around us, revealing a new scene. A virtual replica of a crime scene from one of Vice's real-world murders. I found myself standing in a blood-soaked room, the details so vivid, so real. It was nauseating. Vice was recreating his crimes, reliving his twisted fantasies. As I navigated this nightmare, the line between the virtual and the real blurred. I was no longer sure if I was in Dreamscape or reliving the actual crimes. The horror was palpable, the fear all-consuming. Then, a breakthrough. Amidst the horror, I found a pattern in VC's madness, a signature left behind in each of his virtual recreations. It was a clue, a way to trace him back to his origin in the real world. I logged out, my heart racing, my body drenched in sweat. The evidence was there, a trail leading back to Vice's real identity, to the human behind the monster. But the stakes were higher now. Vice knew I was onto him, and I had no doubt he would escalate his game. I prepared myself for the next phase of the investigation, knowing that each step brought me closer to Vice, but also deeper into the heart of darkness. The web was unraveling, and I was about to come face to face with the spider at its center. The sky was a canvas of bruised purples and grays, as I prepared for what I knew would be my final descent into Dreamscape. This was it, the culmination of a harrowing journey through a landscape of digital horrors. My heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. This was no longer just about catching a criminal. It was personal. Vice had made sure of that. The air in my apartment felt stifling, oppressive, as if charged with the impending confrontation. I equipped myself with a modified interface headset, one that would allow me deeper access into Dreamscape's core systems. If there was any chance of tracking Vice to his physical location, it lay within the heart of his digital domain. As I initiated the dive, the familiar sensation of being pulled into another reality washed over me. The world that materialized was unlike any version of Dreamscape I had encountered before. It was a twisted reflection of the city, a nightmarish metropolis where the architecture pulsated with a malevolent life of its own. The sky roiled with storm clouds and the air was thick with an electric tension. I navigated the dystopian streets, every sense on high alert. Vice's presence was everywhere and nowhere, his malevolence hanging over the city like a shroud. I could feel his eyes on me, tracking my every move. The city transformed around me, morphing into a series of environments that were scenes of Vice's crimes, both virtual and real. Each scenario was a trap, a psychological game designed to wear me down. I found myself in a replica of an old warehouse, the site of one of Vice's most gruesome real-world crimes. The air was thick with the smell of decay, and the sound of dripping water echoed off the walls. Shadows moved in the periphery, playing tricks on my mind. Suddenly, the environment shifted, plunging me into darkness. When the lights flickered back to life, I was surrounded by figures, their faces obscured by masks that were grotesque caricatures of human expressions. They moved towards me, their movements jerky and unnatural. I felt a surge of panic, fighting to remember that this was all a virtual construct. Then, Vice's voice, chilling and omnipresent, filled the space. "Do you feel it, detective? The fear? It's what gives this world life, and you're just another part of it." The figures lunged, and I found myself in a desperate struggle, not against physical assailants, but against my own rising terror. It was a battle for control over my mind, a fight to keep the fear at bay. In the midst of the chaos, a revelation hit me, a connection to the real world, a pattern in Vice's madness that pointed to his physical location. It was the break I needed, but it came with a cost. The environment collapsed around me, sending me into a free fall through a vortex of distorted images and sounds, a maelstrom of Vice's making. I emerged in a replica of my own apartment within Dreamscape. It was eerily accurate down to the smallest detail, and there in the center of the room stood Vice. His avatar was a shifting mass of shadows, a formless embodiment of fear. "This is where it ends, detective," Vice hissed. "In the heart of your own nightmares." I steeled myself, focusing on the connection I had discovered. "No, Vice, this is where you end." The final battle was a blur of digital illusions and mind games. Vice tried to break me, to drown me in fear and despair, but with each attack I grew stronger, more determined. I clung to the thread of reality, using it to anchor myself against the onslaught. And then, in a moment of clarity amidst the chaos, I found the opening I needed and took it. With a surge of willpower, I broke through Vice's defenses, exposing the link to his physical location in the real world. As the police stormed Vice's physical hideout, arresting him in the midst of his digital empire, I logged out of Dreamscape for the last time. The virtual world faded away, leaving me in the quiet reality of my apartment. I sat there, breathing heavily, the adrenaline slowly ebbing away. It was over. Vice was caught, his reign of terror brought to an end, but the scars he left in both the virtual and real worlds would linger. As I looked out at the city, now calm in the early light of dawn, I realized that this was more than just a victory. It was a warning of what could happen when fear and technology intertwined, a reminder that the monsters we create, whether in our minds or our machines, can take on a life of their own. The news was buzzing with the capture of Vice, whose real name was revealed as Elias Cartwright, a former programming genius turned digital psychopath. His lair, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city, was a labyrinth of high-tech equipment and screens, a hub from which he orchestrated his reign of terror in Dreamscape. As I watched the reports, images of the victims haunted me. Their faces, once twisted in fear, were now expressions of relief and confusion. They were free from Vice's grasp, but the scars remained. Dreamscape had been a world of escapism and wonder, but it had turned into a prison of fear, a tool for a madman to exert his twisted will. The authorities shut down Dreamscape indefinitely, citing a major review of virtual reality safety protocols. The digital world I had come to know, a landscape of boundless imagination, was now a closed book, its pages tainted by the horrors it had hosted. I pondered the implications of what had happened as technology, which had promised so much, had also opened the door to new forms of terror. The virtual world, once a realm of escape, had shown its potential to reflect the darkest aspects of human nature. Vice had exploited this, blurring the lines between reality and the digital, making us question the very nature of our existence. But there was something else, a deeper realization that had taken root in me. In facing Vice, in confronting the horrors he had created, I had come face to face with my own fears. The journey through Dreamscape was not just a pursuit of a criminal, it was a confrontation with the primal fears that dwell in all of us. The city was waking up, its streets slowly filling with the hustle of daily life. But the world felt different now. There was a collective sense of relief, but also a newfound wariness. The incident with Vice had changed something fundamental in how we viewed our relationship with technology. As I prepared to leave my apartment, I knew that the scars of this ordeal would stay with me, but there was a sense of closure, a feeling that, despite the darkness we had faced, we had emerged stronger, more aware of the fragile line that separates our reality from the nightmares we create. The sun climbed higher, casting light on the city that had been shrouded in darkness. It was a new day, a chance to move forward. But the lessons of the past lingered. Dreamscape was a reminder of the power of fear, but also of the resilience of the human spirit to overcome it. As I stepped out into the daylight, the city's sounds and sights enveloping me, I realized that the real world, with all its imperfections and challenges, was where our true strength lay.